aloud. And remember, think aloud is when I'm going to kind of model my thoughts and what I do as a student, okay? So let's take a look at today's purpose for today's lesson. And our purpose today is to continue to work on W6-3. That's our personal narrative. And we've narrowed that down to looking just at sensory descriptions. But I want us to think of sensory descriptions as both a reader and a writer, okay? And the reason we need to do this is because we want our narratives to come alive. We want who's ever reading our story, which will probably be a third grader in your elementary school, we want them to feel like they're actually there experiencing the same things you did, okay? So we know that sensory details and descriptions will help us get there. So I think I'm going to put on my reader's hat, and it's fitting today because I have on a Mario hat, so we'll pretend this is my reader's hat. And I want to think about what I already know about sensory descriptions. So I'm going to pull up all the information I already have. I know the goal of a good author is to show a story, not just tell it. Remember my example from last week when I just said the girl was scared? But then I showed you the girl was scared, and I remember I made sure you could see what the girl was doing, hear the loud scream and all that, so that I was showing and not just telling. I know that authors try to use descriptions that relate to all of our senses, so touch, sight, smell, taste, and hearing, sound. And I know use of those takes that visualization to a deeper level. And I know that authors can also use figurative language, like similes and metaphors and personifications, that make things even more vivid. I think since I have my reader's hat on, it might be helpful if I look back to a story and look at how a real author, a published author, uses sensory details. And you guys are going to like this because I pulled a story by Paul Jennings, who wrote A Mouthful. Do you guys remember that story? About the girl with the plastic cat poo. This is another one by Paul Jennings, and it's called Licked, L-I-C-K-E-D. Now, if I was doing this as a regular reader, I'd also think about why did he title that and so on. But I think for today's sake, I'm just in my thought process is going to think out loud the sensory detail information. So here's the beginning of the story. Tomorrow, when Dad calms down, I'll own up. Tell him the truth. He might laugh. He might cry. He might strangle me. But I have to put him out of his misery. So right now I visualize this dad going through all these different emotions, and I'm trying to figure out what this person did that could cause all these different feelings in somebody, especially when they find out the truth. So now I'm intrigued, and I've got kind of a picture of what's going on. Back to the story. I like my dad. He takes me fishing. He arm wrestles with me in front of the fire on cold nights. He plays Scrabble instead of watching the news. He tries practical jokes on me. And he keeps his promises, always. So right now, this is giving me some background information on the dad and helping me visualize these characteristics of the dad. It looks like this person has really fond memories of his dad, but it also appears that his dad is very dependable because it says, and he keeps his promises always. And the way they, focus on that always makes me know how dependable this dad must be. But my dad has two faults, bad faults. One has to do with flies. He can't stand them. If there's a fly in the room, he has to kill it. He won't use fly spray because of the ozone layer, so he chases them with the fly swatter. He races around the house, swiping and swatting like a mad thing. He won't stop until the fly is flat, squashed, sometimes still squirming on the end of the fly swatter. So right there, that author used a lot of sensory descriptions. I can really clearly see this dad running around, swatting things, making sure all the flies are killed. And it kind of even reminds me of my husband. He's kind of a fanatic, too, about flies. And they'll be just like, really, Tom? Just, sit back. That fly's not going to kill you. But this dad, I can really clearly picture him doing that. The author, let me go back to our story here. He's a dead-eye shot, my dad. He hardly ever misses. When his old fly swatter was almost worn out, I bought him a nice yellow one for his birthday. It wasn't yellow for long. It soon had bits of fly smeared all over it. It's funny, the different colors that squash flies have inside them. Mostly it's black or brown, but often there are streaks of runny red stuff, and sometimes bits of blue. The wings flash like diamonds if you hold them up in the light. but mostly the wings fall off unless they are stuck to the swatter with a bit of squashed innards. Well, that's a really clear visual of this fly swatter. So I'm clearly picturing what this fly swatter looks like after it's smashed all these flies. And I'm seeing all these different colors. And the author even used a simile when it said, up here, let me look again, the wings flash like diamonds. And I kind of know what he means because they're that iridescent kind of shine you get from the wings on that. So that's helping it be even more vivid than before. Now I'm going to stop for a minute. I'll finish the story later for you guys. How many of you are somewhat intrigued of what the other fault is? I was too. But I'm going to take off my reader's hat, and now I'm putting on my writer's hat, okay? So pretend like I switched hats. And now I'm going to go back to my story. And remember the other day I told you I had a story idea about the time I was cutting carrots? Anybody remember that story? I think I could turn that into a good story because I think there's good sensory descriptions I could build upon. But that's my first step, is to decide if there really is. So I'm going to switch my sheet here, and you're going to get this graphic organizer, but I'm going to show you my thought processes in filling this out because that's our step where we're at today. So as a writer here, let me get the other one. I've gotten this far done on my graphic organizer. So it's my carrot idea, my story. And my biggest conflict, I was thinking about this at home last night. I think obviously there's a conflict because I cut myself. I already told you guys that. But I was thinking at home last night that I think the biggest conflict actually was that I was home by myself. And that's what caused me to kind of panic. And I think if somebody else would have been with me, I wouldn't have panicked in that situation. So I wrote down my biggest conflict was that I was home by myself and there was no one to check on me. I think that's important that I've established the conflict because that's the part of the story I want to build up the biggest. And then I went ahead and did what, we learn to do when we're in elementary. Think about what's the beginning of my story going to be, what's the middle, and what's the end. So the beginning of the story, I know I have to let my audience know and my readers know my husband's gone and that I was making a vegetable tray for the teachers at the school I worked at. And I know the middle would be about cutting the vegetables and that I cut myself and how I panicked. And then at the end, it would be where I drove myself to the hospital, I put a Band-Aid on, and then they sent me back home, which obviously was a little embarrassing. But I also think I could fit in the 7 habits well on that, too. But can I use good sensory description? So what I have to do now, before I can start writing the story, I've got to make sure there's good sensory description I can add. And so I'm going to think to my story. I've got my chunks, and I've got my dot jots. And I'm going to start in the middle, because I think that's where the action's the most intense. And I think it would be boring if I said I was cutting carrots. I don't think anybody's going to be really engaged by that. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out what I would see while I was cutting carrots so I can get that across to people, what I might hear and so on. So I'm going to close my eyes. Don't do anything strange when my eyes are closed. And I'm just I'm picturing right now the apartment we lived in, and I'm picturing, I've got the cutting board out and I've got the vegetables. And I'm putting the carrots on end. I don't know why. I don't have them laid flat. I'm putting them on end, and I'm cutting them. I can hear, sound-wise, I can hear, the crunch of the carrot, and when it hits what's that sound when it hits the cutting board? Like a clunk sound. I can hear that. So I'm going to jot those down. So when I'm thinking about the carrots there, I'm seeing, sight-wise, I have the carrot on end and cutting, instead of just laying flat, okay? Now that's sight, so I could build that up. What I say about the hearing, what was I hearing? I'm hearing that, the crunch of the knife against the carrot. And then I heard the clunk of the knife on the cutting board. Okay, now, what touch would I feel? Oh, where I cut myself. So once again, if I close my eyes and I really think about it, what did it feel like? What did it feel like? Well, there was kind of a sharp pain, a sharp prick, but then I remember feeling like an oozy, like of the blood running down my finger. Does that kind of gross you out, Daniel, there? You don't like blood? Okay. So I'm going to put like I felt for touch, like a sting from the knife. And then I felt like, kind of like sweat running down your back. So I felt the blood running down finger. Finger? You cut yourself yesterday? Yeah. Like, does my comparison kind of make sense to you? Like sweat running down back. Okay, now remember I still have my writer's hat on. So my job now as a writer, is this going to be descriptive enough that if I'm sharing this with somebody, they're going to be able to visualize it? So I'm looking at this. I think I'm going to use you guys as my guinea pigs. Close your eyes and see if you can visualize if I read it this way. First off, I was cutting vegetables. Okay, you guys got a good picture? How many people think that's a pretty bad sentence? All right, let me try again then. I'm going to try to use my sensory details here. I was in the kitchen cutting carrots. I had put one carrot on end, and I was trying to cut it with a knife going vertically down. I don't know why I didn't lay the carrots flat on the cutting board, but for some reason I had them standing on end. Okay? Did you guys have a good picture? Open your eyes. How many of you right now could draw what I just said? Okay? So that's kind of my test, I think, as a writer, is to think about if someone closed their eyes and I read it to them, could they recreate that picture in their head? What happens when I close my eyes and I don't see anything here? What about as a writer if that happens to you? You close your eyes and you start trying to recall that and you can't recall anything. What would you do, Zane?
I would just stop reading it.
You would stop, but you're a writer now. Because this is the point we're going to be to. We're writers right now. If we get to this stage and I can't think of anything, will this topic work that I want to develop? It might not. You might have to switch something that you can recall different things. So do you notice what I was trying to do? I was trying to think about what was I seeing, what was I hearing, and so on. All right? So now it's your turn. Okay? So what we're going to do, we're going to give you this graphic organizer. I think you can go ahead and